For the business news with Kate Moody. Good evening, Kate.
Hi, Delano.
The UK government has unveiled a raft of support measures for the economy with a focus on jobs.
Yeah, not going quite as far as some had hoped. The emergency furlough scheme that was backed by the state is due to run out in October, and the government has refused to formally extend it. Instead, it'll top up the paychecks of those working fewer hours for a period of 6 months, but only in jobs that are deemed viable. Luke Schrago reports.
Preventing mass layoffs and protecting jobs needed in a post-pandemic economy. That's the thrust of the British government's new support measures as the end of its furlough scheme moves closer next month.
It is better that our support is targeted on and focused on supporting viable jobs in our economy, and that means a new approach. The government will directly support the wages of people in work, giving businesses who face depressed demand the option of keeping employees in a job on shorter hours rather than making them redundant.
It applies to anyone working at least a third of their normal hours. They'll be paid as normal for what they work, with the government and the employer stepping in to pay a third each of what remains unpaid. It means employees should get a little over 3/4 of their pre-pandemic paychecks. By comparison, the government's currently paying 80% of the wages of anyone on its furlough scheme, something it considers isn't sustainable in the long term. The government's looking to give businesses extra relief too, in allowing firms flexibility in paying back money borrowed during the pandemic. They'll now get 10 years to pay back loans rather than 6, something that'll affect 1.3 million small businesses who've borrowed a total of 41.5 billion euros so far. The hospitality and retail sectors get a look in too, with an existing 15% cut to VAT now prolonged to March next year. The UK's current unemployment stands at about 4.1%. However, even as it scrambles to shore up its pandemic economy, the UK is still facing a joblessness rise of 7% by next year, as those not covered by the new measures ultimately face the prospect of losing their jobs.
In the United States, the number of people seeking jobless benefits increased last week, underscoring concerns about the U.S. labor market. 870,000 new claims were recorded, just slightly higher than the previous week, still well above pre-pandemic levels. Continuing claims stand at around 13 million, with the official unemployment rate for August at 8.4%. While many people have been hired back since the beginning of the shutdown in March, significant layoffs are still being announced, including in the aviation, financial services, and technology sectors. Economists expect relatively high levels of claims to continue for some time, and that will weigh on the broader economic recovery.
The longer that those individuals stay unemployed without fiscal support, it's really going to dampen any economic recovery, especially on the spending side. As we go into the holiday season, those consumers, those workers aren't going to be able to really inject as much spending demand into the economy as they otherwise would with that fiscal support.
Well, more generous unemployment benefits in the U.S. have expired, and the Congress appears unlikely to pass another stimulus plan before the November election. Let's check in on the day's trading action now. Choppy session for Wall Street after Wednesday's tech-driven sell-off. Stocks are trending higher, but they've pared back their earlier sharper gains. The tech-heavy Nasdaq up nearly half a percentage point. It is still down nearly 10% for the month of September. Mixed economic data coming out of the U.S. That stagnation in the labor market slightly offset by stronger than expected home sales in August. The major European indices closed lower earlier on, the FTSE 100 losing over 1% in the UK despite those new support measures, the Paris CAC 40 down 0.8%. Moving on to some of the day's other business headlines now. The European Commission has outlined its first attempt at regulating cryptocurrencies. The proposed rules would reduce risks for investors, in part by putting some of the biggest digital currencies under the oversight of the European Banking Authority. The rules could disrupt Facebook's attempt to launch its own digital currency, Libra. The legislation will have to be negotiated and approved by the European Parliament and member states, a process that could take years. Energy giant Total has confirmed it will stop refining oil in the Paris region. It'll spend more than 500 million euros to transition its facilities, including a site in Grand Prix near the capital, to focus on making renewable fuels and plastics. And Turkey's central bank has unexpectedly lifted its benchmark interest rate by 2 percentage points for the first time since 2018. The move was designed to stabilize the lira, which has lost nearly 30% of its value since the beginning of the year. Analysts say it also marks a sign of independence, as President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has repeatedly advocated low rates. The U.S. state of California aims to ban the sale of all new gasoline-powered cars and lorries in 15 years. The announcement is the most significant yet by a U.S. state in aiming to phase out fossil fuel-based cars to combat climate change. Cami Nedlek has more.
Filling up the tank will become a distant memory for an increasing number of Californians, as the local governor banned all petrol-powered vehicles by 2035.
We will move forward to green and decarbonize our vehicle fleet here in the state of California.
The new rule will cut greenhouse gas emissions by 35%. 1 in 10 new vehicles in the United States is bought in California, so the ban will have a big impact on the auto industry. But car makers warn that more needs to be done to bolster consumer demand, as right now, less than 10% of new vehicles are electric. But if prices catch up, that could all change.
4 and 5 years from now, depending on who you ask, EVs are going to hit price parity with gas cars, and then they're going to get cheaper. So long before 2035, you'll see electric vehicles that will outcompete gas cars on price.
Californians who are increasingly concerned about global warming welcomed the change.
It's fortunate that we live in a state that's forward-looking on this kind of policy.
But those who can't afford an eco-friendly upgrade won't be left out in the cold, as the second-hand market for petrol cars will be allowed to continue as before. California will be the first state in America to introduce such a ban, which could trigger other states to follow suit.
Mountain resorts in Austria will open for their lucrative winter sports season, but the traditional after-parties will be banned. Revelers at après-ski gatherings at the start of the 2020 spread the coronavirus and fueled several outbreaks. Austria's chancellor said bars and restaurants will only be allowed to serve seated customers in an effort to reduce the risks, along with social distancing and mask requirements in closed ski lifts. I don't know what skiing is without après-ski, Delano.
I would think the altitude would kill the coronavirus, but clearly not. Nothing kills it.
It's not a very scientific
everything
point
is
of view.
The fun is knocked out of 2020, isn't it? But
you can still go skiing if you want.
we can still go skiing. Just keep your distance on the slopes. Thank you very much for that, Kate. Kate Moody there with today's business news.